Good day, everyone. Do you want to know yourself in just one semester? Well, we cannot do that, but we will try to understand ourselves by looking into the different aspects of this subject. Let us start with Lesson 1, the self in its various perspectives. Before we start with our lesson, let me introduce to you our learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to first, explain the importance of understanding the self. Second, discuss the different views of understanding self from different philosophers. Third, compare and contrast how the self has been represented in different philosophical schools. And lastly, examine oneself against the different views of self that were discussed in class. Before we even had to be in any formal institution of learning, among the many things that we were first taught as kids is to articulate and write our names. Growing up, we were told to refer back to this name when talking about ourselves. Our parents painstakingly thought about our names. Should we be named after a famous celebrity, a respected politician, a historical personality, or even a saint? Were you named after one? Our names represent who we are. It has not been accustomed to just randomly pick a combination of letters and numbers to denote our being. Like for example, ZHJK756 punctuation mark period dot ABC. Human beings attach names that are meaningful to birth progenies because names are supposed to designate us in the world. Thus, some people get baptized with names such as precious, beauty, or lovely. Likewise, when our parents call our names, we were taught to respond to them because our names are our papers, projects, or any output for that matter. Our names signify us. Death cannot even stop this bond between the person and her name. Names are inscribed even into one's gravestone. A name is not the person itself, no matter how intimately bound it is with bearer. It is only a signifier. A person who was named after a saint may not even turn out to be saintly. The self is thought to be something else than the name. The self is something that a person perennially molds, shapes, and develops. The self is not a static thing that one is simply born with, like a mole on one's face, or is just assigned by one's parents, just like a name. Everyone is tasked to discover oneself. Have you truly discovered yours? So now, we will discuss the philosophical perspective about self. Philosophers are the one who propose the ways how people think about thinking. So they are the great thinkers and are reflective people. The Greeks were the ones who seriously questioned myths and moved away from them in attempting to understand reality and respond to perennial questions of curiosity, including the question of the self. The different perspective and views on the self can be best seen and understood by revisiting its prime movers and identify the most important conjectures made by philosophers from the ancient times to the contemporary period. The pre-Socratics, or those who lived prior to Socrates, and others who existed around Socrates' time, such as Thales, Pythagoras, Parmenides, Heraclitus, and Empedocles, were concerned with explaining what the world is really made up of, why the world is so, and what explains the changes that they observed around them. Tired of simply conceding to mythological accounts propounded by poet theologians like Homer and Hesiod, these men endeavored to finally locate an explanation about the nature of change, the seeming permanence despite change, and the unity of the world amidst the diversity. Socrates was more concerned with another subject, the problem of the self. He was the first philosopher who ever engaged in a systematic questioning about the self. To Socrates, the true test of the philosopher is to know oneself. His famous line is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." He had a trial for allegedly corrupting the minds of the young and old in Athens to the presuppositions about themselves and about the world, particularly about who they are. For Socrates, every man is composed of body and soul. This means that every human person is dualistic. That is, he is composed of two important aspects of his personhood. This means all individuals have an imperfect, impermanent aspect to him and the body while maintaining that there is also a soul that is perfect and permanent. Plato is Socrates' student who basically took off from his master and supported the idea that man is a dual nature of body and soul. He added that there are three components of the soul. First, the rational soul. It is the soul forged by reason and intellect which has to govern the affairs of the human person. The second one is the spirited soul. This is in charge of emotions. And the third one is the appetitive soul, which is in charge of the base desires like eating, drinking, sleeping, and having sexual intercourse. In Plato's book, The Republic, he emphasizes that justice in the human person can only be attained if the three parts of the soul are working harmoniously with one another. When this ideal state is attained, then the human person's soul becomes just and virtuous. Following the ancient view of Plato and infusing it with newfound doctrine of Christianity, Augustine agreed that man is of a bifurcated nature. An aspect of man dwells in the world and is imperfect and continuously yearns to be with the divine, and the other is capable of reaching immortality. The body is bound to die on earth, and the soul is to anticipate living eternally in a realm of spiritual bliss in communion with God. This is because the body only thrives in the imperfect physical reality that is the world, whereas the soul can also stay after death in an eternal realm with the all-transcendent God. The goal of every human person is to attain this communion and bliss with the divine by living his life on earth in virtue. Thomas Aquinas was the most eminent 13th century scholar and stalwart of medieval philosophy who appended something to the Christian view of Augustine. Adopting some ideas from Aristotle, Aquinas said that man is composed of two parts. The first part is the matter, or hyle in Greek. This refers to the common stuff that makes up everything in the universe. Man's body is part of this matter. The second part is the form or the morph in Greek. This refers to the essence of a substance or thing. It is what makes it what it is. In the case of the human person, the body is something he shares even with the animals. The cells in man's body are more or less akin to the cells of any other living organic being in the world. To Aquinas, the soul is what animates the body. It is what makes us humans. René Descartes is the father of modern philosophy. In his famous treatise, The Meditations of First Philosophy, he claimed that there is so much that we should doubt. He says that since much of what we think and believe are not infallible, they may turn out to be false. If something is so clear and lucid as not to be even doubted, then that is the only time when one should actually buy a proposition. He thought that the only thing that one cannot doubt is the existence of the self. For even one doubts oneself, that only proves that there is a doubting self, a thing that thinks, and therefore that cannot be doubted. René Descartes' famous Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, says that the fact that one thinks should lead one to conclude without a trace of doubt that they exist. For him, the self is a combination of two distinct entities. First, the cogito. It is the thing that thinks, which is the mind. The second one is the extensa, or the extension of the mind, which is the body. For him, the body is nothing else but a machine that is attached to the mind. The human person has it, but it is not what makes man a man. David Hume is a Scottish philosopher who has a very unique way of looking at man. As an empiricist who believes that one can know only what comes from the senses and experiences, he argues that the self is nothing like what his predecessors thought of it. The self is not an entity over and beyond the physical body. Empiricism is the school of thought that espouses the idea that knowledge can only be possible if it is sensed and experienced. For him, the self is nothing else but a bundle of impressions. If one tries to examine his experiences, he finds that they can all be categorized into two. The first one is impressions. Impressions are the basic objects of our experience or sensation. They are vivid because they are products of our direct experience with the world. Example, the cold sensation when touching an ice cube. The second one is ideas. These are copies of impressions. They are not as lively and vivid as our impressions. Example, when one imagines the feeling of being in love for the first time. According to David Hume, self is simply a bundle or collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement. Immanuel Kant recognizes the veracity of Hume's account that everything starts with perception and sensation of impressions. He thinks that the things that men perceive around them are not just randomly infused into the human person without an organizing principle that regulates the relationship of all these impressions. For him, there is necessarily a mind that organizes the impressions that men get from the external world. Example, time and space. These are ideas that one cannot find in the world but is built in our minds. He calls it the apparatus of the mind. Without the self, one cannot organize the different impressions that one gets in relation to his own existence. Thus, the self is not just what gives one his personality, it is also the seat of knowledge acquisition for all human persons. Gilbert Ryle solves the mind-body dichotomy that has been running for a long time in the history of thought by blatantly denying the concept of an internal non-physical self. For him, what truly matters is the behavior that the person manifests in his day-to-day life. Example, looking for and trying to understand a self as it really exists is like visiting your friend's university and looking for the university. One can roam around the campus, visit the library and the football field, and meet the administrators and faculty and still up not finding the university. This is because the campus, the people, the systems, and the territory all form the university. Gilbert Ryle suggests that a self is not an entity one can locate and analyze, but simply the convenient name that people use to refer to all the behaviors that people make. Maurice Merleau-Ponty is a phenomenologist who says that the mind and body are so intertwined that they cannot be separated from one another. One cannot find any experience that is not an embodied experience. All experience is embodied. One's body is his opening towards its existence to the world. Because of these bodies, men are in the world. For him, the living body, his thoughts, emotions, and experiences are all one. These are the points of view of the various philosophers across time and place. I believe that you already examined yourself against these different views. I hope you learned something from this lesson. Thank you, keep safe, and God bless.